Hi, this is Dr. Carl Goldkamp. If you're interested in learning about the ketogenic diet like I was, to save my own life, then this is probably the podcast for you. 8 years ago, I knew nothing about it. 6 years ago, it saved my life. 3 years ago, I started researching and talking with some of the authorities in the field and attending medical conferences about this to understand why and how keto so dramatically changed my and my wife's Judy's lives. The purpose of this podcast is to share our journey of discoveries with you in understanding how keto is so effective in improving so many different conditions, from obesity, epilepsy, diabetes, infertility, MS, Alzheimer's, heart disease, to name a few. So take a step away from all the hype you've probably heard and roll up your sleeves with me and join me weekly to explore this living miracle that anyone can access. We'll talk science, we'll talk food. We'll explore its history and evolution to today, which is that the sheer wonder of the ketogenic way of eating has changed untold number of lives, unlike anything before it. And in case I forget to mention it, please join our Facebook group, Keto Naturopath. Hi, this is Dr. Goldkamp, and welcome back to another episode of the Keto Naturopath. I'm pretty excited about what I want to talk about today, and I hope it can come across somewhat coherently. The nice thing about doing a podcast is that I don't have to take you frame by frame by frame by frame into the next thing. You know, it's not like building a logistical approach to something. But so I can be a little more spontaneous as a point. So why I'm fairly excited and confessional as well is that, you know, I do 4 panels of labs. You know, we have a big, long, roughly $500 panel. I call it an assessment panel. And that has to do with some of the basic labs, such as your lipids, your CBC, your chem panel, your vitamin D, your omega-6 panel, I put in carnitine, insulin-like growth factor, insulin, of course, paired with the glucose. What else I got in there? Lactate dehydrogenase for the liver. It's kind of part of the liver panel. And other stuff. So it's a sizable panel, but that's just blood work. That's almost as much as, and glucagon, as much as that's sort of stretching the window of what would be considered a basic panel. It's still my basic panel. I get to have a sense about this person. I can calculate from these numbers various things. You know, certainly there are omega-6 issues. I can look at, I do, B12, folic acid, magnesium. I'll throw on the things that you think that would, I'm just giving it to you off the top of my head. But I can calculate their insulin resistance, and I have a number of different ways I can do that. And it really gives me sort of almost a bird's eye view. It gives me sort of a corner of a bird's eye view. To that, the next co-valuable test to do is the genomic panel. So these are all the SNPs, single nuclear polymorphisms, and I use Strategene. Is that the best? No, I've gotten to use, it's certainly very good, but there's others that are very good out there, and there's others that are very poor out there. There's got to be at least 500. So I started with them a while ago. They've evolved. I get to call in, if I have a question, about, hey, do I have to dig through the raw data, or is there a faster way to get to this particular SNP that I'm after, or something like that? So at least I have that relationship, and relationships are worth something. After that, I do SpectraCell. So that's a lymphocyte, intracellular lymphocyte micronutrient assessment panel. They do other tips, but that's the one I use. Is it perfect? Are they perfect? I've known them for over 20 years. In their early days, I don't know if I was one of their heavier consumers, but insurance covered it. So everybody who came into my office, they did it. Maybe they had a smaller copay, like under $100. Insurance stopped covering it, so we stopped having to convince patients they ought to do this. It was just too much work to do that and everything else. But I did that so often, they were sending me pounds of chocolate at Christmas. I'm not a chocoholic, but my wife appreciated it. So I'm familiar with them, and they've evolved as well. Are they perfect? No. And they piss off a lot of people in their customer service at times. Absolutely they do. But I have a consistency, and I know some of my colleagues go, oh, I left them and I go over and do that. Well, other companies don't cover exactly what they cover on SpectraCell, and I like that. I like the way they put it out. I like the formatting, and I like the delivery of the information. I'm always interested in other, like Genova used to be Great Smokies, or Great Western or whatever. They're all good, but it takes a while to get enough experience, enough patience to go through there to really see their weaknesses and their strength. And I'm not really ready to take on another one unless I have a whole separate problem to look at, like environmental exposures or something like that, which I do not do in my basic 4 panels. So they got the genome, we got the intracellular, and then last is a hormone panel, the Dutch panel, which is a more or less a 24-hour sequence. It's a dried urine, so it stands for Dried Urine Complete Hormone Panel. That's where they get this acronym of Dutch. It's by companies called Precision Analytic. And they're in Oregon. I like them a lot. And so I do that with the saliva. So I get a sense of cortisol, some organic acids, which help me sort of define neurotransmitters. But I like that information paired with the SpectraCell, paired with that panel that I do primarily from LabCorp right now. And so the pairing really helps me. And then I bring in the whole SNP library, right? The whole SNP. And it's about, it's brace yourself. It's like a 160-page report. So we just look at it online and have my library of different reports. So I like to begin there. So what I've re-examined. So when I put this together, and there's a degree of a lot of work to, put the spreadsheets there so you see comparisons and so on, is that it is a lot of information. It is blinding when you go into look at all those SNPs and you go, oh, I just fell off the dock and into the water. And it's like, I have no idea what I'm talking about. Well, that's where the experience comes in. You start cranking it over. And initially, you do just look at things that are in the closely related to MTHFR, and there's variations there. And you look at the ones, other SNPs that are, I'm not going to go through it all, but there's a good group of 10. So I call it an ecosystem. And you find out which ones of those have a problem, or they're the slower form or the faster form. So you look at that. But one of the ones that's really always been on the panel in the last couple of years since Strategene sort of got a little more elaborate is PEMT, and that's phosphatidylethylamine methyltransferase, should you even care. But it actually is a focus. So the other ones, the MTHFR and the related genes, genes, really focus around folate and B12. So they call it the folic acid cycle. And yeah, it has to do with neurotransmitters and the whole thing. I mean, it's all interrelated, so nothing's just isolated. But it's pretty much a story of where are we relative to folate, B12. You go to look at the blood work and you go, there's a relationship there, or the intracellular. So you get to sort of build a case. Back to PEMT, which is all about choline. All about choline. And choline is not new in my life. I remember back in the early 2000s that I think it was through SpectraCell tests only, some patients would come back with choline and you'd give them a supplement of choline or talk about food sources. But I think then I was a little more supplement oriented. So I give them a choline supplement and, take it 3 times a day and so on and so forth. Tell me how it goes. And it was amazing the stories I would get back on the other side. They go, wow, my dreams are great. Wow. And it said, I didn't think I was cognitively impaired, but I am on the money now. And these were, specifically, I am seeing across the desk from me, a man in his mid-50s and very well educated. And he goes, oh, I remember choline. That was like back in the 60s. We used to all take this, So choline has been around for a while. It's not like, oh, it's just been discovered. But the story, so I would go back and now I would check these genes too, because there's, as I say, it's a big report. You go back and you go, these people, not everybody. I realized that I didn't put enough emphasis on these people who are homozygous for various, there's really only 2 major SNPs for PEMT, even though there's plenty of polymorphisms, is just 2. Just like MTHFR, there's really just 2 we talk about, but there are many polymorphisms, but 2 that are well researched and where the focus is on. So we look at that. Anyway, when you see somebody that has homozygous for both of them, and I've had a number of people, I go, how did I miss this? I can't really remember if I counseled them on that or not. But since I'm in this sort of renaissance of going back and looking for all these reports, I realize, wow, these people, for the most part, came to me before about being overweight and sometimes even about cognitive impairment or just not quite feeling right. And I remember there's this one gentleman who has a pretty big business and video and so on and marketing. And I think I missed I don't think I put enough emphasis on it. I mean, I would scan it and give him sort of the overview and then pick out the things that I thought were important. But that was important. That was real important. And here's the story behind that. So it's the SNP I'm going to tell you about, but I'm going to tell you about not just PEMT. I'm going to tell you about choline in particular. And I'm going to talk about our dietary changes over the last 70 years, as if I've never mentioned that before, right? But the last 70 years isn't just like any other 70 years. Since the 50s, we have gone down the shooter, but I spelled that a little differently, We've gone down the shooter in a very bad way. I mean, how can we explain in the mid to late 70s, this arc up of Alzheimer's and dementia? I mean, the inflection point. So it's not like we just discovered dementia or Alzheimer's. No, that was discovered nearly 100 years prior. It's like it just arced up. And so initially I thought, well, it's all about the oil, the processed foods, because you saw that's where soy arced up and corn oil. And so that was primarily, soy was a vegetable oil. The idea that you needed to have polyunsaturated and drop your saturated fats, which means drop your animal food sources. It's not like people have steak, but they don't have the saturated fats. It's like, that's not a possibility. So they basically had less meat, certainly had less organ meat, pretty much none. And so, and those studies were done from more or less the late 60s to the early 70s in Australia and the United States. So that set the stage for that. So I thought, well, the correlation looks pretty straightforward. Well, you got to think the correlation to what exactly? So what I just said about the oils is correct. And there's a whole bandwagon of people saying, yep, we need to get our omega-6 and omega-3 levels, to 1-to-1. And I'm all for that. And that's true and that's correct. But let's not have that be our only story. That's not the only thing. But back to the idea that was propagated from the 50s and 60s and 70s and all the way up to really about now, was that you should drop your animal sources of food. Certainly and some people were relieved. I mean, I don't have to have liver. Oh my gosh, I finally got to a point I don't have to have liver in my life. People just sort of hate liver. So they hate liver. So that hating of liver started in the 50s, right? Before that, you ate what was on your plate and your folks brought it. They even had things like tripe and other things but most of us ate if you went back 50 years before that. Well, that was shed. Liver became unpopular. It became the cheap meat for the most part. You'd have a little pate, little chicken liver pate, or you have foie gras, which is basically goose liver from geese that had induced insulin resistance and fatty liver. That's another story. But anyway, liver from poultry was haute cuisine, and other livers started to fall out of favor big time. Eggs were the second villain. No, don't have eggs. They're going to raise your cholesterol. And the whole thing was you need to drop your cholesterol levels, which started with dropping your saturated fats. So they were nixed. They were nixed for about 60, 70 years. Now, finally, I would say in the last 5 years, it's become, no, and you can argue, say 10 years. I'll be generous, 10 years. No, there's a lot of value there. Absolutely, there's value. But on those two foods, cutting back on eggs, and I'm speaking primarily egg yolks, and liver, regardless of the sources, any sort of animal liver, was dropped significantly. So what that meant was that the dietary supply of choline dropped significantly and quickly. So now we have a population, and even the NIH did a study called NHANES. I forgot what NHANES stand for, but they have a lot of really interesting studies that they did, national, thousands of people, that men and women were deficient in choline by a little bit. They have X amount that you need, and now it's been such a rethinking around choline that it's probably going to be the next sort of choline added to food sources. It's so important, but certainly it's given to pregnant moms for their kids and so on and so forth. So because it was a deficiency, they started to find out what's happening with our population, right? All these chronic diseases just went, that's up, by the way. And so it's become a big deal. So I just talked about diet in that side. And the second part was about the genome part, was there is a fairly large population. I would say it's 25 to 40%. I think it depends if you're homozygous or heterozygous for the two PEMT genes. If you're homozygous for both, you can't convert, you can't make endogenous phosphatidylcholine, what's otherwise known as lecithin, which every cell in your body uses. And so therefore you're really dependent on dietary sources. So if I just said your dietary source just kind of decreased by half anyway, if not by 75%, wow, this population not only, which already had their problem, but they came from the generation in which you ate your liver, ate everything in front of you, and you feel lucky that you got the food that you got. And that's true. And you ate those things that you didn't like, Brussels sprouts and liver and lima beans, the whole 9 yards. So consequently, this population is severely at risk for all the things that low choline does. And so now let me back out and pretend I didn't tell you that there's a genetically predisposed population that needs choline like you wouldn't believe. Let's pretend that's not there. That choline by itself, dietarily, choline deficiency. So you not having enough choline on a daily basis, even though you can make some of your own lecithin, and that's a source of choline, that you then, this deficiency will cause a number of things. What's it going to cause? It's going to cause non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And if you were on the standard American diet, which is high carbs and high fat, well, the high carbs part is going to make a double problem for you, because choline, make a long story short, is getting your carbs, which come in as triglycerides, out of the liver and into the bloodstream so they can be stored in your fat. So now you're adding to the problem. It has more work to do because you're having all these carbs, all those processed foods, remember? And you're not getting enough choline. So you're going to get non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and more than likely you will go to obesity and insulin resistance. So just on the aspect of choline deficiency, the amount of obesity, insulin resistance, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease will go up. So then comes along the whole ketogenic diet, which is drop the carbs, increase the fats. Well, if you drop the carbs and increase the fats, that's going to be a good thing in terms of protecting you somewhat against insulin resistance and, to a degree, obesity, a little bit there. But you'll still have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So I'm saying, how treatable is this? This is one thing that comes from, and the highest source actually is egg yolks, and I would argue that and say its liver is better, but they are neck and neck. And these are the two things, and I've even done a video on it. You take these two things out of your diet, people are going to get sick. Not only they'll get sick, they're going to, the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, yeah, just said that, obesity and insulin resistance to whatever extent you have high carbs, right? But you're also well on your way to become cognitively impaired. So you're going to go through mild cognitive impairment, MCI, to cognitive impairment, to dementia, to Alzheimer's. That's the other reason all of this has sprung up. So it is directly related to cognitive impairment. So now I'll give you a few studies. That's Carl's story and sort of a ad lib, bring you up through research and history and so on and so forth. It's much more fascinating than I've described to you. But here is a study that came out. When's the date on this? This is 2019. So you remember me talking about Randy Yertle's mice, right? The agouti mice. And that showed that you took these mice that were bred to be fat and yellow, and you gave them methyl donors, which we're going to call, and which he did primarily were B vitamins. A little more specific than that, but we'll call it B vitamins. And poof, their next generation, their kids were no longer diabetic or no longer fat, prone to cancer, and yellow. They came out normal brown color, and they lived long, healthy lives, all because the mom, while they were pregnant, right, before pregnancy, before conception, and during pregnancy, were given B vitamins, methyl donors. Pretty interesting. So, not so much the agouti mouse, but this is a whole different thing. Another mouse that was bred to have choline problems, right? So they, in essence, are called knockout mice. So they knocked out their PEMT gene. So they can't make any endogenous choline, which is lecithin, phosphatidylcholine. So they are down by estimates of 30 to 40% just by knocking that out. So what happened is that they grew up and they were mentally impaired. They were demented mice, first generation out. So then they took these knockout mice and they gave them more dietary choline. So they compensated for their deficiency. So what happened here? And I'm actually looking at an illustration. So mice with the AD, Alzheimer's-like symptoms, right? They had the Alzheimer's-like symptoms because they were knockout mice and they couldn't manufacture any of their own lecithin choline. Okay, so mice with Alzheimer-like symptoms are given a high choline diet while pregnant. And the first generation showed improvements in spatial memory. The second generation, so the kids of the kids, their grandkids, they must be proud grandparents, but they're demented and can't recognize their grandkids. Second generation of offspring who had no direct choline supplementation also showed benefits likely due to the inherited modification in their genes from their parents who weren't given choline, but they were the kids, the first generation of that had parents that were given choline prior to birth. Isn't that interesting? So that's about choline and mental improvement. And it goes on and back to me, I go, well, I know about choline. And choline, I already told you my story about the guy who was back in the early 2000s. So I haven't been out of the loop. But now I realize that this is a whole level. This is a whole level to show causatively how Alzheimer's and dementia has risen so quickly. It's because not only the special population that's at risk, we're going to call them, right? Those with the particular polymorphisms, the SNPs, and that would be the PEMT, and also the other one was BHMT. It just two others that I'd look at, I didn't put enough emphasis on, and now going back, and I realized these guys weren't just coming to me from being overweight, they were coming to me because they were just feeling mentally they weren't there. And they were right on. They're absolutely right on. So choline deficiency by itself, if we were all robots and didn't have any sort of polymorphisms and, SNPs we had to worry about, it as a deficiency would drive those same things. It would drive obesity, insulin resistance, and most certainly non-alcoholic fatty liver disease to grow into cognitive impairment, dementia, and Alzheimer's. That's a big deal. Now you throw in those who already needed more, but they got more because we had to clean our plates back then, and we had plenty of eggs on a daily basis, and we had liver at least a couple times a week. They were good. They were taken care of. It wasn't any problem at all. Take those two things away, they are up a creek. They are seriously up a creek. So these mice, this is 2019, these mice did this experiment. And so you have papers that go back to early 2000s. And when I was in med school talking about choline, and they didn't get into measuring SNPs back then and having papers on it, but this has really become the issue. So when I talk about the triad, I talk about your diet now doesn't have the choline it should have had. There's a population of people that are predisposed to greater deficiency, greater needs for choline. Now I'm just talking about choline here. And the third thing is think about all the medications that all the medications that people take that block choline, either reduce its uptake or increase its excretion of, and puts people, normal people, regardless of their genetic predisposition, normal people into choline deficiency. And so what would that be? That would be, they call nighttime pain relievers. That would be your acetaminophen and some other NSAIDs. I don't know if aspirin is in that category. Antihistamines. So when you have your Benadryl, they used to have, my mother always took Benadryl to sort of help her go to sleep. She didn't necessarily have allergies, but that was directly diminishing her choline, and consequently, she lived to 94, but was pretty mentally impaired in the last couple of years for a number of reasons. This being one of them. Sleep aids are another one. Antidepressants are another one. Incontinence drugs and narcotic pain relievers. So there's a lot. So that's the third part of the triad, are things that you're taking on your own because you either were told to, or you're safe, or whatever, or you're taking it too long. You've now depleted, reduced the amount of choline that you needed. Maybe you're one of these people that have much more increased need for choline, and maybe you're one of these people that don't do eggs and don't do liver, and because you were a good doobie and you followed the government guidelines that you shouldn't be doing this, and they screwed you. Sorry. No, there's no other way to say it. They screwed you. Whether it was politically motivated, financially motivated, or just misinformation and they didn't know, you can choose. I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole. So there you go. That's the triad that has made you fat and dumb. Hate to be blunt. And guess what? The reason I'm talking about it is you can undo it. You can absolutely undo it. So yes, when we talk about the ketogenic diet, it's really helpful. Absolutely. You drop those carbs, you take a burden off your liver, and you will improve a lot of situations. But you still have to assess, or you still have to make sure you're getting enough choline. And I could have made this conversation also about folate and B12, but I've talked, I think, a lot about that, and I certainly scan a lot about that. So these are kind of the triads that I look at, and I call these different ecosystems of your SNPs. So I look now around. I thought I always did, but I'm now, it's like as I say, it's a renaissance of me sort of going back into the whole choline thing, and seeing how important that is. And so some of you are probably hearing, all right, I'll start taking choline as a supplement. Why don't you just do what your grandparents did and have choline as egg yolks, so therefore have eggs, and have liver, all sorts of liver. It doesn't have to be foie gras. And so do the thing and put it in your food, and you're going to get it. Guess what you're going to get? If you do liver and egg yolks, you're going to get all those folate and B vitamins, and you're good. You just undid, in a positive way, that triad. So this is really good marching orders, I hope, that you're listening to, that you can do. You can directly change yourself. So whether you don't want to become Alzheimer's, or you don't want your parents to become Alzheimer's, or you don't want to have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or you don't want to be obese, or you are, or insulin resistance, you need to look at this. This is so important, by the way. One thing I was going to mention is that if you go on to your browser and you go to, just in your browser, go NIH, you don't have to spell out National Institutes of Health, NIH, fact sheet, singular, fact sheet for consumers, and then put in the nutrient. So you go NIH, fact sheet for consumers. This is words now. This is not a website or anything. And then put in choline, or you can put in folate, or you can put in B12. You're going to have a sheet pop up from the NIH, and this is really pretty cool. And it goes through, hey, this is what is generally recommended. You eyeball that, and it says these are your best sources. And it also breaks down and I've seen this for the last 10 or 15 years, and it's gotten better. And it talks specifically about, it goes down, so what happens if you don't get enough choline? What are some of the effects of choline on health? I mean, this is sort of basic nutrition, but it goes into non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and it also mentions PEMT. And it's like saying, this is right up there with being kind of normal information. And there's lots of links for even more data, depending how you want to drill it down. But I go down and I look for best sources of food, and so it says, there it goes, meat, eggs, poultry, fish, dairy products. I mean, if you have to justify your dairy on choline, there's a lot better. You know my bit about dairy, but you gotta do that. You gotta look at it and see what your sources are, and it's just an easy thing to have. So in the very least, go look at that. Get some good information. And it's not just pablum. It's not just basic stuff. It gets into some pretty sophisticated things that is very helpful. Okay, so with that, those are marching orders. Those are things you can get done yourself. Pretty cool, huh? All right, till next time. Bye-bye. Hi, this is Dr. Goldkamp again for a brief reminder of something I completely forget to do at the end of every episode. You've heard me talk long enough in many different episodes, but what I would love you to do, and many of you have already done this, I just want to reinforce this particular behavior, which is to send me your questions. Send me your questions and anything you have about keto. If there's something that I don't know, I will look it up. And if it's something that intrigues me, I will probably make an episode, a podcast about that particular topic. So what you need to do is to send me your questions at drgoldkamp@ketonaturopath.com. So that's DRGOLDKAMP at KETONATUROPATH.com. Dr. Goldkamp@ketonaturopath.com. Feel free to join our Facebook group, which is also ketonaturopath.com. That's been growing lately. You also have to answer a questionnaire should you choose to join. And I don't ask for your email. I ask that you follow our terms. I try to avoid advertising and the obvious interruptions of just a good Facebook group. So hope to see you at one place or other. Please send me your questions and look forward to talking to you and getting to know you. Take care.